Hey everybody. So I decided I was going to build this Mini-T Telecaster, the kit from StewMac, Stewart MacDonald's, and I figured, it was going to be quite a learning process for me. I know there's a lot of videos out there that do little bits and pieces, and actually StewMac even has a huge, long, really detailed version with someone who's been building stuff for a long time and clearly does it for a living. But I thought I would try and give you the layman's version of trying to build this Mini-T Kit. So as you can see here, this is the stuff that I've gotten. It's the Mini-T guitar kit. And then if you look at all the different cans of stuff, going from left to right, we have the grain filler. It's a mahogany body, so it's kind of porous. So one of the things I had read was that I need to use grain filler. Then the next part is the vinyl sealer. Supposedly this is what's going to give it something to, it'll give the color something to adhere to when I spray the color. For the color of the body, I'm going to use cherry red, which is the color that they say is close to Gibson's Heritage Red. Then I got a couple of cans of the clear gloss lacquer. Not in this picture, but I did get a can of satin gloss, which I wanted to use on the neck, but it's not in the picture. And then to try and get that high gloss shine, I got the polishing compounds, medium, fine, and then the swirl remover. Right, so here is the box for the Mini-T opened. It does come with a little gig bag and set of instructions. And this is what it looks like. It's kind of put together, so you do have to take it apart to start working on it. The neck looked pretty good. When I ran my fingers down the sides of the frets, it did feel like the frets were protruding out a little bit. And so I'm going to have to take care of that. So that's the unboxing. Now the next part is I wanted to make the headstock look like a Telecaster headstock. The original headstock kind of looks a little paddly, and so what I did was I downloaded templates for what a Telecaster headstock should look like. And as you can see here, I'm basically using the American Standard template. Cut it out. First make a template, a wooden template. So this way, when I use a Dremel tool as a router, I could then have something that guides the router bit and not worry about, if on the actual headstock, if I make a mistake and somehow gouge the headstock and now I have to get a new neck or whatever. First start with a template. And so this is now what the template looks like. I've drawn it out on this little piece of poplar, which is a 1/4 inch thick by 5 inches wide. And so as you can see, I could just use the top edge for the top edge of the template. Now, here's a picture of me using the Dremel tool as a router. I did order a router base for the Dremel tool, so this way I have something to cut against. And as you can imagine, when you finish cutting it, it's all really rough. And so I used 220 grit sandpaper in order to make the edges of the template nice and smooth. Here's another angle of it so you can see kind of how smooth it is. And I also drilled holes for each of the locations of the tuning pegs. Here it is, lining it up against the peg head so you can see pretty much how much I'd have to remove. One of the things I discovered was if I lined the peg head holes up starting with the low E string, what I found was that the high E string kind of went off the edge a little. So what I decided was to distribute the difference. What I made sure of was that the G and the D strings lined up against the holes of the peg head as close to perfectly as I possibly could. And that meant the low E and the high E strings were off-center just a little bit, but not by too much. And this was my way of sort of centering the template to make the headstock as correct as I possibly could. Before I started working on the actual neck, I wanted to make sure I was going to protect the fretboard from any potential damage. So at this point, here's a little video I made of me taping up the rosewood fretboard so it wouldn't get damaged. Now here you can see I've taped the template to the headstock so it won't move. What you don't really see is I basically also used a whole lot of tape in between the template and the headstock so it wouldn't move. I kind of wish I had double-sided tape. I think it would have made it easier, but I just looped, back looped, reverse looped that blue painter's tape, and I just used a lot of it to make sure that it all lined up properly. Then I began routing. And then the first thing I discovered was, it's not so clear in this picture, but it's clearer in this picture, that the length of the router bit wasn't long enough to go all the way through the peg head. So what it was going to require was a second pass after I went through the whole first pass. Now here's a picture of the headstock after I went through the second pass. The one thing I do want to point out to you is you can see how rough the cut was, and the router bit got really hot during the course of routing out that headstock, and so I was going to have to sand it all down, and I took a sheet of 220 grit sandpaper, and I kept sanding and sanding and sanding till I got it, pretty darn smooth again. One of the things that you can see on the right side of the headstock is this notch out where it just didn't go down far enough. And what I had to do there to get rid of that was, or to even it out, to smooth it out, was I took actually a sheet of 100 grit sandpaper, because the 220 grit was going to take way too long. I took the 100 grit sandpaper and I smoothed all that out. So it was a lot of sanding. Your arms do get a serious workout. Then I went and I sanded the whole thing down with 400 grit sandpaper to make sure that it was all nice and smooth.